And what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. Today, we are continuing our What Went Wrong series, where we look at the shortcomings of every team that missed the MLS Cup playoffs in 2025. And we are heading out west this time to chat about a team that neither Connor or myself thought would be here, to be fair, and that's St. Louis City SC. Lots of hype coming into the new year, and it was not met with the performance on the pitch. It just wasn't. And they're going to miss the playoffs again. So we're going to break down what got to this point, and we had to do it with some of our guests. So we brought back Matt to chat St. Louis with us. Matt, how you doing, buddy?
I'm doing all right, Andrew. Thanks for having me back, even if it's under these circumstances.
Man, I'll tell you, they have been some of the greatest chats we've had so far. Even though it's been on negative, topics, we've had so much fun breaking down. So I hope it continues that way. And it always starts off with a great scarf. What are you rocking for us today?
Well, good old Facebook memories taught me that 2 years ago today, or 2 years ago yesterday, actually, October 1st, when we're recording it, we clinched the regular season first place in the Western Conference. And so, in honor of that, because I don't know when the next time I'm going to get to show one of these, I've got the 2023 MLS Cup playoff scarf from St. Louis City.
Nice. I like it. I like it. Very cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
those are good memories to have for sure. We're rocking on my side. We got the city scarf sent to us by our friends at stlouissoccernews.com. So always a pleasure to work over there. Um, Unfortunately, it means that we have to now dive into the not so fun part, and that is what went wrong with St. Louis City this year. I'm going to send it over to you for your 1A. What's the big 1A for you?
I think 1A is where it all stems from because you pulled me in and you said come up with two or three things and we
Mhm.
could base the conversation off of that. But for us, it comes down to one single thing, and it was the disastrous coaching hire of Olof Mellberg. Every single thing that has gone wrong with St. Louis City SC can be tracked back to Olaf Mellberg's hire, at least this year's what's gone bad. You can even backtrack it to the end of 2024 in how this relates to that, because at the end of 2024, you had John Hackworth step in, the technical director for City, former coach of City 2, and former head coach of plenty of clubs, including youth national team experience, assistant to the men's national team experience. He takes over the club on an interim basis from Bradley Carnell in 2024. He gets them to he coached around, I want to say 10 to 15 games, and he had them overall under his tenure at about a 1.35 points per game. So cumulatively, he would have been a playoff team, albeit just barely dipping in. But if you get in between in the nitty-gritty of his tenure, the trend was extremely positive. He finished his stretch extremely strong, the back half. And so you could kind of see parallels to me on where City's 2025 season is compared to the end of 2024. And that leads into a whole different just bucket to talk about regarding our current head coach. But the point is, City chose not to hire John Hackworth as their head coach. At the time, Lutz Pfannenstiel, our then and only permanent sporting director so far, made comments that Hackworth's importance was too much to the team in the technical director role. They valued him, and he needed Hackworth as a technical director more so than he needed him on the sidelines coaching City. And so the thought was, you need Hackworth in the front office. You can find a head coach that both of you can be happy with, along with our president and GM Diego Gigliani, who is kind of over our entire organization above Lutz at the time, above the sporting director role at the time. And the three of them can find a head coach that can carry on what John Hackworth had done. The players were in place by and large. We didn't do a ton of work in the offseason last year. We brought in Conrad Wallem on loan. There were a couple other, I would say, window dressing pieces that we brought in, Alfredo Morales, but most of the pieces were there. And so the idea is you have what John Hackworth did, you carry it forward into 2025. What ends up happening is you get Olof Mellberg coming in, and it was very apparent from the very beginning that he was taking our 4-2-3-1 approach and he was shifting it entirely to wing backs. I think Conrad Wallem coming in was an indicator that he excelled at the wing back role, and you could use him. You could use Thomas Totland as a right wing back, and it would take a player out of the attack, but it would provide width on the wings, where we were already a team that liked width on the wings. And so this is with down the attack, I should say. And so this was kind of a natural progression, at least as the time. So the fan base was buying into it. Early on in Olaf Mellberg's tenure, though, it became you play to not lose the game. Our first four matches weren't overly bad. We had two draws, we had two wins. But from that point, that was it for Olof Mellberg on winning in MLS. It stopped after the first four games. He had 15 total games that he coached in Major League Soccer, the MLS regular season, and he won two of them. Back-to-back games, our third and fourth against the LA Galaxy and Seattle Sounders. He had one total game. If you look at the stats, one game out of 15 that City had an XG of greater than 2.0. And the thing about Olaf's tenure is, to me, it's defined by the fact that you feel like you were watching a team that was playing to not lose. They were playing afraid. They were playing to not concede, and it crippled their attack. We were playing from behind. We were chasing leads all over the place, and it never manufactured into this evolution, what Lutz Pfannenstiel had described as a City 2.0, where you're wanting to take this high-intensity pressing style play, the gegenpressing that Red Bulls had made famous in Major League Soccer. We're taking a version of that. You take that and you intend to be better on the ball. That was the mantra going into this season, is that St. Louis would be a better team on the ball, better in possession, better in buildup, more intentional, and they would be a better passing team. And it never materialized. There was never a single game where you can say this team is a good possession-based team. Even in just changing the tactics up from match to match, team to team, if you need to have a different look, a plan B from your regular pressing, your direct to goal counterattacking, there was nothing there. It was always like they attempted to do it, but then it didn't work early on in a match, and so they just fell back into almost a low block bunker. Our PPDA numbers, our pressing metrics, they fell apart under Olof, and it was just not attractive soccer. Fans, it was immediately noticeable that this was a team that just wasn't enjoyable to watch. And the players slowly started to just, it feels like, check out of the entire structure, to the point where at one point under Olof, he made a comment in a press conference that he didn't have the quality of players necessary to implement his style of play. So you're seeing the result. You're seeing what he felt he needed to implement in order to not lose games, to get a point here and there. And it led into a handful of draws, but there was a stretch of 4 games in a row where we lost. And like I said, the only 2 games we won were in those first 4. So you get to the U.S. Open Cup time around April, and unless you can make a run in the Open Cup, there's nothing that fans want to have to do with Olof as head coach anymore, because there's no belief that he can change things, he can turn it around. He doesn't have any other creative solutions. There was a point there towards the end of his tenure where we were running out three players consistently that I don't even think City fans want on the roster anymore after this season, in Akil Watts, Josh Yarrow, and Kyle Hebert. And they're decent players. I won't go so far as to say they're quality, but they're decent. They're serviceable. They're MLS backup caliber. They've been with the team since City 2. They've ingrained themselves into the fan base. Fans do like those players as people. But there is no team in Major League Soccer that should be having all 3 of those players on the field as regular starters. And that's what Olof Mellberg's tenure ended as. There were options that he could have used creatively to help with the injury bug that kept biting us in the beginning of the season, because that's probably the only thing you could say Olof had working against him besides the players at his disposal, is we did have injuries ravage us early in the season. We were out both of our top choice center backs. We were out strikers. We were out midfielders. Edu Leuven had personal issues he was dealing with. All of this kind of led to multiple games in a row where we had 6, 7, 8 players on the availability report. So he was operating almost with one hand tied behind his back in certain ways, but there was never a creative solution to attempt to change things. It was run out the same roster of backups and just hope something different changes. And it was made transparent by the fact that when David Critchley took over for Olof in his first match, he ran Chris Durkin, our center midfielder, as a center back, something that John Hackworth had done once or twice last season, and we won our first game. I mean, that juxtaposition right there shows the impact that Olof had, but it wasn't just stopping when he was dismissed after 15 games, because having David Critchley step in, who was our City 2 head coach and had come through the organization after being at a separate local youth academy as their sporting director, coming and coaching some teens in a U16 level, he eventually takes over after Olof Mellberg. But the whole idea is placing him as, quote, a caretaker manager. They didn't even put the interim tag on him. They put a caretaker tag on him. Not only a nod to his roots in Liverpool, but the sense of this isn't his team. He just needs to get them back to the basics, back to where this team should be. And so that's the point that he took over the team. It's not take over the team and start winning games. It's take over the team and retrain their mind into what they need to be doing to learn how to play the St. Louis City style of soccer. And so that to me explains why his run of form took so long to actually build something into and to have some meaningful consecutive games, which he has started to see recently. Way too little too late, but that entire process all goes back to the choice to hire Olof Mellberg.
And this is why we bring on the experts, if you will, because my first point was exactly that. The hiring process and the hiring of Olof Mellberg. But that level of detail is something we'll never get to. So we appreciate that. But I'll just build off on some thoughts that I had here too, was this idea that you know, as much as I'm confused, as much as the Mellberg era was poor, right? And I think that's something we all can agree on, that it didn't go well. I'm very, very confused with the hiring process, and maybe you can shed some light on this, the hiring process in and of itself, right? Because if I remember correctly, and I might be mixing my words here, when he was let go, the statement came out, and it was something along the lines of like, we weren't so impressed with his style, his game style, his management style, whatever. You had him for 17 games and you weren't impressed with his style. So to me, that tells me, one, you didn't watch enough tape on him to know what his style was. Two, you let him sweet talk his way into saying, "Oh no, trust me, I can change," when we all know managers are not type of people to change. Or three, you completely just bypassed all of it and said, "We're going to bring him in anyway." And then at that point you said, "Oh, I don't really know if he's the right guy." And then 17 games later he's gone. That's shocking to me. 17 games is not enough to you to get a feeling of if he can turn it around or not. So to me, it seemed like you hired him with the expectation he was going to fail anyway. But maybe that's just from the outsider point of view.
Oh, the only part of what you said that I would disagree on is that we hired him with the expectation he would fail. I think I wouldn't go that far, but a lot of your other points are incredibly valid. I would probably start with the idea that it was alluded to multiple times by Lutz San Diego in his dismissal press conference, where he was gone and they were kind of post-morteming the whole thing, that he didn't do what he sold himself as capable of doing, which is to play the style that City wants to, the counterattacking, the high intensity, the press style, and to be more aggressive, but to do it within whatever formation he preferred. They didn't have a problem, I would think, with wingbacks necessarily, but it's the way that he employed everything. And so I got the sense that it was the Lutz and Diego were sold a bag of beans by Olaf. He sold them as this I can absolutely run this style. Whether they saw tape or not that told them one way or the other, it was clear that he presented himself as someone capable of running the style that they wanted him to employ. Why they hired him in general, outside of him stating that, I think is kind of illuminating into what the process was and what a lot of our concerns are about with the process now, which is the fact that he had success developing a youth academy. So his old team in Sweden had the largest youth academy in all of Europe, and he was developing them well. And so that's one thing, because St. Louis prides ourselves on developing from within, having a successful homegrown pipeline up to St. Louis City, including the academy levels up to City 2, recruiting from our area and making the most of them. That, I think, is core to what St. Louis as an organization wants to do. And so to have a head coach that had that kind of pedigree was a big notch in his belt. The other thing is that he operated without the largest budget, and his success on the field was inconsistent, but it was there at the levels he was coaching. He had coaching experience at the first, second, and third divisions in Sweden, and he was moderately successful at least remaining in the first division. But he took a club that had been relegated, and he gained promotion 2 times in a row. 2 consecutive seasons he had promotion. So there was a level of provenness to his ability to win with a lesser budget against lower competition, though. And I think all of these, yes, he did this, but starts to add up into it's not the proven success that they were looking for. It's other qualitative properties around what he's able to do off the field, in developing players, in working within the system that I think maybe to an extent we feel we have here in St. Louis. We're not the highest spenders in the world. We don't have star players that he's able to work with and just say, all right, we're just going to give you the ball, feed it to you, and you save us. And so that approach was appealing to Olaf or to Lutz and Diego and John Hackworth. What ended up happening though was a rigidness, an inflexibility that prevented him from taking the roster he had available, especially when he was riddled with some injuries, and making them into something more.
Yeah. I think that's a really good way to put it. Yeah, I think the idea that maybe they expected him to fail was definitely more like blowing it up than it needed to be. But yeah, you could tell that it just didn't make sense to hire a guy to talk all this. He's going to be the guy for us, and he's going to put all the pieces together. Just to let him go in 17 games, something didn't feel right there. So thank you for that insight because that's huge for us.
And what I can also say, just a little bit of an insight into maybe what some of the front office was thinking on this, is that I know there was frustration in that lack of creativity. I know for a fact, talking to people, that his lack of changing it up from the personnel that he was using to the tactics that he was employing. I know for a fact that week to week, as we were losing, as we were drawing, the front office became frustrated that he wasn't trying something different. It was obvious that there were certain pieces that were never going to work, yet he kept going back to that well. And so I think there reached a boiling point, even 10, 12, 14 games into it, where you're just saying, at some point we're gonna have to call this. Like he's going to keep dragging us down. We're going to be wooden spoon contenders and early season winners of that. We have to stop the bleeding at some point.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot more sense from our point of view. So that's awesome. From that point, I think we could talk probably about him for a lot longer if we wanted to. But maybe we change gears here and see anything else that might have led to this? Because the coach is such a big part of it, but he's not the only part, right?
Well, and that's why I started from an Olof Mellberg has all these tentacles, right? His impact on the players was rather catastrophic. The lack of confidence that a player like Klaus had. Klaus is our only double-digit goal scorer for multiple seasons in all competitions. He's got, I think, 9 in MLS right now. He's got another couple in US Open Cup. So he's got 2 seasons out of 3 where he's got double-digit goals in all comps. That kind of player is one of our designated players, and we have to have him perform as our striker. Under Olof Mellberg, he felt like he was crippled and he had no confidence. He still had a good volume of shots per game, but none of them were falling. He didn't like where the service was coming from. He wasn't finishing as he had been known to finish in the past. And it just seemed like his confidence was shot. And not just his confidence, but you had midfielders that were not able to build up. Our fullbacks, our wing backs, they weren't confident in their ability to progress up each wing. And so this lack of confidence, because of the system that was being run, that was where David Critchley took over. And so it took a while, not just to get back into the style of play that we wanted to, but it took a while to get the confidence back. And David Critchley has talked to us multiple times about individual conversations that he's had to have with players because they need not just a confidence boost, but they need to turn it around just mentally in general. It almost felt like, as bad as we thought things had gotten at the end of the Bradley Carnell era in 2024, between player fights, suspensions, this felt like you had a locker room that wasn't just like fractured among each other, but it was a locker room where there was just no confidence that they could walk into a match and even score a goal, much less pull out 3 points. So Critchley gets to work on that. But at the same time, the heart of what David Critchley was doing with that team is rewiring them to be able to play St. Louis City style soccer. Something that you had Marcel Hartl, Cedric Toyshirt, Simon Betcher come in at the end of 2024, and that was what they started to learn. I mean, this is a massive change over a significant period of time where you're coming into a system in 2024, you play a dozen games, you're used to one thing, and then a new coach comes in and just blows it all up, has you do something totally different for 15, 17 all-comp games, and then David Critchley comes back. Part of David Critchley's search to find the roots of St. Louis City-style soccer and get the players to buy into that was a focus on the attack. So you see all these matches where, yeah, David Critchley is now turning it around to get 2.5, 2.3, 2.0 consecutively expected goals per game, but we're scoring 0 goals. We're scoring 1 goal. They're not falling yet because you don't have that confidence and finishing ability in the buildup. They're not used to what they're doing yet. They're still used to bunkering, to playing a lower block and trying to pass their way out of it, even though to be fair, they might not be skilled enough to pass out of it because they weren't brought in to do that. So Critchley has a very intentional way of turning this around, and it started with the attack. It started with turning that around at almost at the expense of the defense, because we saw many games where we were leaking goals, especially on set piece opportunities. We have not been a good set piece defending team at all this year in games, especially lately, past 2 or 3 months, where they're 1 goal differential games. There have been multiple of those where we haven't allowed a single goal in the run of play. So Critchley has turned it around to the point where he fixed the attack, I would say. He's worked on the defense, but you have all these other individual type moments where you commit a stupid penalty or you allow a set piece goal for 3 or 4 straight games, or you just allow goals, like bleeding goals after the 70th, 75th minute. That was a hallmark of the Critchley era for about 10 games, is that we just could not hold a lead. The players didn't have the confidence. They didn't have the understanding of what you needed to do when you went up a goal to then not concede. And Critchley spoke here recently. There's a club-sponsored podcast called City Voice that was released just today, where Critchley gave comments about a week or two ago. And he talked about how that was probably the biggest issue with St. Louis, is that they didn't know how to hold a lead. They would constantly, and Taylor Twellman pointed this out on the national broadcast. We pointed it out locally, that this team had, I want to say at some point it was like 11 goals out of 14 games scored in the last 15 minutes of a game after 75. It was a disaster of an ability to finish out a game. So that became the hallmark of David Critchley's tenure, as he's trying to rewire the team, get the attack right, then get the defense right, and then just get the mentality of it all right. And it does seem like it's come around to an extent, but you go so long with that as the fallout from what Olof Mellberg had instilled on these guys. And that's kind of why I say even that can be traced back to Olof.
And you know what? I am, again, it makes me feel really good that the expert is on the same wavelength as me, because I'm going to jump right in, kind of like a point you made there in the middle, was this idea that you're creating a ton of goals, but you don't have the confidence to finish them. When you aren't scoring goals, you can't make the playoffs, right? So I kind of was tracking in a little bit more, some advanced stats here, because that's what we do on this show. We're a bunch of nerds, but the idea that coming into this season, you had healthy Klaus, Loven, Hartel, Toy Shirt, Betcher, like all these guys all playing together. We were really excited about Wallem on the wings. Like it was like this is it. Like this is gonna get St. Louis back to where they needed to be. And they finished third with the third least goals in the Western Conference. It's like, that doesn't make sense. And then you go a bit deeper, and it's not because they weren't creating, right? They have the second worst non-penalty goals minus XG figure in the league. Only Atlanta's worse, and it is minus 8.7. I mean, that is a unbelievable number for a group like that. And the fact that you're creating all these chances is so good, but why you weren't finishing them, and again, as we pointed out, it's because you've lost your confidence with the hire. But when you don't put the ball in the net, you can't make the playoffs no matter how much you create. So that was the big one for me, was the idea that they just weren't figuring it out in the final third.
And you can dive into that a little bit too, because I talk about that stat on Flyover Footy at my podcast all the time. Yeah. Individually, you can point to a few players that are the biggest problems in that. Simon Betcher, Conrad Wallem, Thomas Totland, Timo Baumgartel, and Klaus are all -1 or above or below in that category in non-penalty goals minus XG, where you're saying, how much are these guys underperforming? Well, Simon Betcher in particular, he was one of our 2 strikers at the end of last season, along with Klaus. Betcher has almost -6 non-penalty goals minus expected goals. So he scored 2 goals this season, and the numbers say he should be scoring 8 or more. It's a disaster, and he's lost time under David Critchley, partly as a result of his inability to finish. And it's been really sad, because Betcher went to school at St. Louis University. He's a huge fan favorite. He had a lot of promise coming in last season, being one of our leading goal scorers when all was said and done last year, after playing for maybe a dozen games. Right. But this year, he never got it going because his positioning was never what it needed to be. And when it was what it needed to be in a second striker role, he was playing under Olof. And so there was never the ball progression to be able to get him up where he needed to be, because he's a line breaking forward. Klaus is more of a hold up striker. Betcher is that guy who plays off of Klaus and gets it. Nico Gioacchini was a similar striker back in 2023 for us, and he had double-digit goals scored. But this year, it never got started for Simon Betcher. And And you look at who's overperforming in some of those numbers, and there's only, I would say, 5 players who are overperforming their XG who have any number of significant minutes, and maybe even 2 or 3 regarding significant minutes. Talking about Edu Leuven, Marcel Hartl, and Celio Pompeu. The others who are overperforming are defender Josh Yarrow, who he's a defender, Haziel Orozco, who was just signed mid-season from City 2, and Brendan McSorley, who was just signed a few weeks ago from City 2. Nobody else is overperforming. Nobody else is scoring more goals than the underlying metrics. So there's just no finishing that has been consistent, even as David Critchley has started to turn it around because it was so abysmal under Olaf.
Yeah, yeah, and it is. I mean, it's a common theme with a lot of the teams that don't make the playoffs, so they're not scoring goals, right? But
Yeah.
this is another level, right? This is another level where it's like, okay, you've got teams that clearly they're not scoring goals, but they're not creating anything either. They're defending for 90 minutes. They get 2 shots a game. Like it is what it is. But this is another level. So I kind of want
Yeah.
to ask you as we wrap this up. I don't know if that might be the answer to this question, but you've got one thing that you can wave a magic wand and fix, just make it perfect for next year to get St. Louis to be as successful as possible. What is that one thing?
Oh, one thing.
It's a tough one, I know.
It is because the growth St. Louis has had this season they've patchworked a few things together. Like throughout the season, we've talked about what's gone wrong, but we have a lot of pieces in place that are going to come back next season, like Sangbin Jong from Minnesota. He's going to come back. We're going to pick up his option as a U22. Falou Fall, our center back, 21-year-old Senegalese guy, he's on a U22 deal. He's under contract. Like, so holes that we've done a decent job of fixing. But I tend to just say either a second striker or a proven speedy winger.
Mm.
Because what St. Louis hasn't brought in is a proven talent that can score goals. We brought in Cedric Toyshirt, who had one good goal scoring season. Marcel Hartl had one really good goal scoring season with St. Pauli. They've had multiple decent seasons, but we're talking about a designated player who has proven himself capable of being a double-digit goal scorer in whatever league they've been in. We haven't had that, and when we brought in a player who kind of approaches that, it's one who, like a Klaus or somebody who's only had one season of that. And so I don't consider that proven. So I think if I could improve one thing, it would be to have that kind of a player at our disposal. Because like you said, it's not a problem overall when you look at these numbers that St. Louis isn't generating opportunity. They're not creating chances. And that's probably been the most frustrating thing while just watching the team that's been consistent and gotten almost worse under David Critchley is their inability to score chances that they've created. That's what we need. We need a goal scorer, somebody who can break into the top 10, top 15 in Major League Soccer. That would make the difference. I feel that would be the spark that St. Louis needs. We've done decent at creating these build-up opportunities, whether it's from the fullback area, from the midfield, on the counterattack, turning the ball over in the attacking third. Proven goal scoring is something that we've lacked, and we desperately need that one player to be our spark next season, regardless of if David Critchley comes back as head coach, whoever we end up hiring as our sporting director that takes over from Lutz, who was fired right after the transfer window. So that to me is the biggest need. Somebody, and I'll take a left winger, I'll take a number 10, I'll take a second striker, because you've got guys like Klaus is going to be a striker, yeah, but Marcel Hartl is so versatile. He's a 10, he's played left mid, he's played right mid, he's played back at the 6. So he's almost that kind of player that is going to be high quality wherever you need him. You have somebody in the attack that can score goals, getting service from him and from Edu Leuven and from Thomas Totland and from Klaus holding it up. We're going to be in a much better place.
Well, let me tell you, and I've tried to get many people to buy into this idea, but haven't gotten there yet. I can offer you a Wiki Carmona who will give you 150 games of really hard work. No end product, but really hard work, and everybody else will be so motivated by it they'll play better. And you just throw in 2 million in GAM, maybe a couple of draft picks, and we're there. I'll get my guys on the phone, you get your guys. I don't think you're going to buy it. That's too bad. We'll try it again another time.
Maybe another time.
Oh man, Matt, thanks so much for hopping on. We had a really good time chatting with you here today. Unfortunately, with the topic not being as great as it could be, but we learned a lot, and I think our listeners are really going to appreciate your insight. So why don't you take a minute, tell people where to find you and what you do?
I hope so. Thank you for having me. And maybe our conversations next season will be much more positive and lively on that front. But I host a podcast called Flyover Footy in St. Louis. We cover everything about St. Louis. We talk about what happened at training, at press conferences, inner workings, post game, all that kind of stuff. We also cover some men's national team aspects, especially as it relates to St. Louisans, but we dive into the U.S. stuff as well. And then just overall soccer in St. Louis. So whether you want to learn more about St. Louis, or if your team's about to play St. Louis and you want to see, what's it like from our side, give us a follow, give us a download, because we'll be talking about, we preview teams upcoming, we do postmortems afterwards, and then we have usually a midweek where we have a player interview.
Yeah, that's it. It's really good stuff, guys. So please go take a look. Please dive in. And they are my one-stop shop whenever I need to go get anything St. Louis City prepped for one of our episodes. So make sure you go over there, give them a listen, give them a download, give them a follow, let them know you sent you. And if you're new here, we're doing this for every single team that missed the playoffs. And then we've got all of our playoff content coming up as well. So give us a follow if you're in for that. But thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next time on the next episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. See ya.